You want to spoil my reputation. Let me warn you, if I ever see you talking to my members in church, I will make sure you regret it.
Listen, come closer. Let me tell you a story. A story about a girl who stayed silent for 10 good years, until the day she stood up in church and exposed the man everyone trusted the most. Lily sat at the top of the stairs that night, wrapped in her pink nightgown, holding her favorite stuffed rabbit. She had woken up to loud voices, her mother's soft cries and her father's deep, angry growl rising through the walls like thunder. She crept out of her bed quietly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The light from downstairs was yellow and flickering, and the shadows of her parents danced on the wall like monsters. Lily pressed herself against the wooden railing and looked down. What she saw next would stay inside her chest for the next 10 years like a stone she could never remove. Her father, Pastor Daniel, the man who prayed over sick children on Sunday mornings, the man who told wedding couples to love each other forever, the man whose smile made the whole congregation feel warm and safe, that same man shoved her mother with both hands. Her mother's name was Grace. And Grace did not fight back. She stumbled. She reached for the railing. She missed. And then she fell, down the stairs, her body making a terrible sound that Lily would hear in her dreams every single night for years. The scream that came from Lily's own throat was the last sound she ever made. Because when her mother hit the floor and stopped moving, something inside Lily stopped too. The doctors called it selective mutism. The therapist said it was trauma. The teachers said she was troubled. But no one, not one single adult, asked the right question. No one asked what Lily had seen. They all looked at her big, quiet eyes and assumed she was broken. Her father stood in every hospital corridor with tears on his face, telling everyone how the accident had destroyed his poor daughter. She saw her mother fall, he would say, wiping his eyes with a white handkerchief. It was a terrible accident. We are still healing. And people believed him. Because Pastor Daniel was a good man. Everyone said so. But Lily knew the truth. And the truth lived inside her like fire. Before we begin, if you love powerful stories that reveal hidden truths, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Pastor Daniel was not just a church leader. He was the heart of the entire community. Every Sunday, he stood at the pulpit in his crisp white shirt and dark suit, and he spoke about love, forgiveness, and the protection of family. His voice was rich and smooth, like honey poured over warm bread. Women wept when he preached. Men nodded slowly, their hearts in their hands. Young couples came to him for marriage counseling. Old widows came for comfort. Children ran to hug him after service, and he would laugh loudly and lift them into the air. He gave food to poor families. He visited the sick in hospital. He organized school fees for children who had none. In the eyes of everyone who knew him, Pastor Daniel was a saint walking among ordinary people. But inside his home, behind the heavy curtains and the polished front door, he was a different man entirely. He controlled everything. What Grace wore. Who she could speak to. Where she could go. If dinner was 5 minutes late, his voice would drop to a cold, quiet hiss that was more terrifying than any shout. Grace had learned to tiptoe around his moves the way you tiptoe around a sleeping lion. She smiled in public. She covered bruises with long sleeves. She told her sister she was fine, she was happy, everything was perfectly fine. Because the world outside would never believe her. The world outside worshipped Daniel. And Grace knew that. After Grace died, after the accident, Pastor Daniel's reputation only grew. People admired him even more. That poor man, they whispered in the marketplace. Raising that child alone. Still showing up every Sunday. Still serving God after all that loss. Women brought him food. Men offered help. The church gave him a special evening service where they prayed for him and Lily. He stood at the front, head bowed, tears running down his face, and the whole congregation cried with him. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking performance. And no one saw it for what it was. Lily sat in the front pew every Sunday, silent, watching her father perform. She never cried. She never smiled. She just watched him with her calm, dark eyes, and if anyone had looked closely enough, they would have seen something behind those eyes that was not sadness. It was knowledge. By the time Lily was 10, she had built a whole world inside her silence. She carried a small notebook everywhere she went. It had a brown cover and her name written on it in careful letters. When teachers asked her questions, she wrote the answers down and passed the notebook across the desk. When other children asked her to play, she would nod or shake her head. When she was hungry, she pointed. When she was scared, she pressed herself into the nearest corner and wrapped her arms around her own body. She was never rude. She was never angry. She was simply quiet. Like a sealed door. Like a locked room. Like a well with something heavy at the bottom. Her teachers struggled with her. Some were kind. Mrs. Eleanor, her third-grade teacher, used to sit beside her at lunch and read aloud from storybooks, never demanding that Lily respond. "You can just listen," Mrs. Eleanor would say softly. "Your ears work fine, and that's enough for today." Those were the only moments Lily's face relaxed slightly, the only moments the tight line of her small mouth softened just a little. Other teachers were not so patient. One teacher, Mr. Peters, once shouted at her in front of the class, saying she was being dramatic and stubborn and that she needed to snap out of it. Lily said nothing. She simply looked at him with her steady eyes until he looked away first. She always looked away last. At home, she and her father lived like two strangers sharing a building. He tried, in his way, to appear like a caring father, leaving food on the table, buying her new school shoes each term, attending every parents' meeting with his pastor's small family in place. But he never touched her. Not even once. Not a hand on the shoulder, not a pat on the head. Because somewhere deep inside Pastor Daniel, he knew. He knew that Lily had been at the top of those stairs. And that knowledge sat between them at every meal, invisible but heavy as iron. Lily began drawing when she was 11. Her pictures were never flowers or houses or suns with smiling faces like the other children drew. She drew a woman in a white dress, arms stretched out, falling. She drew a tall figure with broad shoulders standing above the woman. She drew stairs, always stairs. She kept the drawings hidden in the back of her notebook, folded carefully. But one day, her classmate Ruth found them. Ruth stared at the drawings for a long time, and then looked at Lily with wide, confused eyes. "Who is this?" Ruth whispered. Lily simply took the notebook back, folded it shut, and said nothing. Ruth was not like other children. She asked questions that nobody else thought to ask. She was 12 when she decided that Lily was her best friend, whether Lily liked it or not. Every morning she would sit beside Lily at the back of the classroom. Every lunch break she would bring 2 portions of whatever her mother had packed and push 1 portion toward Lily without saying anything. Ruth understood somehow, in the way that some children simply understand, that Lily did not need to be fixed. She needed to be accompanied. So Ruth walked beside her. Not in front, not behind. Beside. And slowly, gradually, like a flower that had been in the dark and was feeling the first edge of sunlight, Lily began to trust her. They communicated in their own private language. Ruth would ask questions, and Lily would write one-word answers or draw small pictures in the margins of Ruth's school notebook. Once, Ruth asked, "Do you miss your mom?" Lily picked up Ruth's pen and drew a simple picture, a woman with long hair, arms open wide. Then she put a small heart next to the woman. Ruth swallowed hard and nodded and said nothing more, because what more was there to say? Another time, Ruth asked, "Are you scared of your dad?" There was a long pause. Then Lily slowly drew a small figure at the top of a staircase, watching. Ruth stared at the drawing. Her hands went still. She looked at Lily carefully. But Lily had already closed the notebook. Ruth started paying attention to things that others missed. She noticed how Lily would stop completely whenever Pastor Daniel entered the room, like a small animal freezing in the presence of a predator. She noticed how Lily never, ever went near the door of her father's church office, always taking the long way around the hallway to avoid it. She noticed how at church events, when Pastor Daniel would put his hand on someone's shoulder to bless them, Lily would flinch, even from across the room, even when he was not touching her at all. Ruth was 12 years old and she could not name what she was seeing, but she felt it the way you feel cold air coming from under a locked door. One afternoon, Ruth told her own mother what she had noticed. Her mother, a quiet, cautious woman, went very still. "Ruth," she said carefully, "these are very serious things you are saying about a man of God." Ruth looked at her mother steadily. "Mom," she said, "I'm not saying anything. I'm just describing what I see." Her mother was quiet for a long time after that. She looked out the window toward the church building at the end of the road. And she said nothing more. But she did not forget. Lily turned 14, and the cracks in the perfect picture began to show. There was a woman in the church named Sister Naomi. She was a widow, gentle and soft-spoken, who had joined the church the year before. Pastor Daniel had taken a special interest in her welfare, visiting her home, offering her counsel, ensuring she was properly supported by the congregation. The church celebrated his kindness. But Sister Naomi had a teenage daughter named Ada who had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Ada noticed that Pastor Daniel visited her mother's home more than once a week. She noticed that her mother would get nervous before he came, fixing her hair, changing her dress. She said nothing at first. But she stored it all up inside her, the way you store kindling before a fire. Then one Sunday, something unexpected happened. A new family joined the church, the Martins. Mrs. Martin had recently left an abusive marriage, and she stood at the front of the church to give her testimony. She spoke carefully, choosing her words, describing how her husband had controlled her, isolated her, and hurt her. Her voice trembled but stayed strong. And something happened in that moment that no one in the congregation was prepared for. Lily, who always sat still and blank during service, began to shake. Not visibly, not dramatically, just a fine, quiet trembling that Ruth, sitting beside her, could feel through their touching arms. Ruth looked at Lily's face. Lily's eyes were fixed on Mrs. Martin like a woman seeing her own reflection for the first time. After service, while everyone gathered outside, a brave woman named Mrs. Josephine, who had known Grace before she died, found herself standing near Lily. Mrs. Josephine had always privately wondered about the night Grace died. She had seen Grace's bruises once, years ago, and Grace had laughed them off. Now she looked at Lily and spoke quietly, gently, like she was offering something fragile. "Your mother," she said softly, "was a very beautiful and very strong woman. I hope you know that." Lily turned to look at her. For a moment, just a moment, Mrs. Josephine saw something move behind Lily's dark eyes like a fish moving beneath still water. Then Lily reached into her notebook and wrote 3 words. She showed them to Mrs. Josephine. "She knows." Mrs. Josephine stared at the words. Her hands went cold. The drawings began appearing in new places that year. Lily started leaving them, small, folded pieces of paper, tucked under the edge of the church notice board, slipped inside the pages of library books, pressed beneath the leg of a bench in the church garden. A woman falling. A tall figure standing over her. Stairs. She never signed them. She never explained them. But people began to find them, and to wonder, and to whisper. The small fire of doubt had been lit. If this story is touching your heart so far, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We share powerful stories like this that remind us that truth always finds its way to the light. By 15, Lily had begun to understand something important. Silence was not safety. Silence had only protected one person, and that person was not her. She spent more time at the town library, where she read everything she could find. Books about law. Books about court cases. Books about what happened to children who witnessed violence. She wrote notes in her brown notebook in her small, careful handwriting and underlined words like testimony and witness and truth. The librarian, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Cole, noticed Lily's reading choices and watched her with quiet concern. One afternoon, Mrs. Cole placed a slim book on the table beside Lily without a word. It was called When Children See Too Much. Lily picked it up. She read it cover to cover without moving from her chair. When she finally set it down, her eyes were red but dry. She had long since run out of easy tears. At home, her father was beginning to feel the shift. He could not name it, but something in Lily's stillness had changed. She was no longer just quiet, she was waiting. He would catch her watching him sometimes, and the look in her eyes made his collar feel too tight. He tried harder to perform warmth. He called her, "my dear daughter," at church events and placed his hand near her shoulder without quite touching it. He bought her a silver bracelet for her 15th birthday and said, loudly enough for others to hear, "I would do anything for this child. She is my whole world." Lily accepted the bracelet without expression. She never wore it. Ruth, by now, had grown into a fierce and determined young woman. She had never stopped paying attention. She had kept, in her own notebook, a quiet record of everything she had noticed over the years: the freezing, the drawings, the avoidance of the office door, the flinching. She did not know yet what she would do with it. But she kept it the way you keep a key, not knowing yet which door it will open. One evening, she sat beside Lily on the steps outside the library, and she said, "Lily, when you're ready, whenever that is, I will stand right beside you." Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, "I know. I am almost ready." That night, alone in her bedroom, Lily took out a fresh page and began writing. Not pictures this time. Words. Sentences. Paragraphs. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping, and when she was done, her hand was shaking and the page was full. She folded it and placed it inside the back cover of her notebook. She did not know yet when she would use it, but she knew now that she would. She was almost 18. And she had been quiet long enough. Pastor Daniel's church was planning the grandest event it had seen in years. The occasion was a double celebration: the church's 20th anniversary and a special honoring of Pastor Daniel for his 20 years of faithful service and sacrifice. A large banner was printed and hung across the front of the building in gold and white letters: "A man of God. A pillar of this community." Chairs were arranged in neat rows in the church courtyard. A catering company was hired. A choir was rehearsed. A journalist from the community newspaper had been invited. Flowers were arranged on every table. It was, by all appearances, going to be a beautiful day. The church elders spent weeks preparing speeches. Elder Barnabas, the oldest and most respected, had written 4 pages of tribute that he rehearsed every morning before breakfast. He would talk about the families Pastor Daniel had helped, the marriages he had saved, the youth he had guided, the community projects he had funded. He would talk about the tragedy of losing Grace and how Pastor Daniel had risen from that grief like a true man of faith. He would present a framed certificate. There would be applause. There would be tears. It would be perfect. Lily watched all of it being prepared with calm, dark eyes. She helped arrange chairs when asked. She helped fold programs when asked. She moved quietly through all the preparations like a shadow, doing what was needed, drawing no attention to herself. Her father watched her from across the courtyard and felt, for the first time in years, something close to relief. She had been quiet for 10 years. She would be quiet today. He was sure of it. He straightened his collar, smiled at Elder Barnabas, and shook the journalist's hand. Today was his day. His reputation, his legacy, his triumph. Ruth arrived early that morning and found Lily standing alone near the back of the church garden. She was wearing a simple white dress. Her brown notebook was pressed against her chest. Her face was still and calm in a way that Ruth had never seen before, not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of someone who has made a decision and found peace in it. Ruth walked to her and stood beside her without speaking. After a long moment, Lily reached into her notebook and took out the folded page she had written 3 years ago and added to over time. She held it out to Ruth. Ruth unfolded it and read. When she finished, she looked up with shining eyes. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Lily looked at her steadily. Then, for the first time in 10 years, Lily opened her mouth just to whisper 2 words to her best friend, "I'm ready." The courtyard was full. Every seat was taken. Family members had come from far away. Church members in their finest clothes filled every row. Children sat in small groups near the front, curious and bright-eyed. The journalist had a notepad open and a camera slung around his neck. The mayor's representative had sent a written greeting that Elder Barnabas would read aloud. The choir stood in 3 rows in their blue and white robes, faces glowing. The sun was warm and the flowers were bright and everything looked exactly the way Pastor Daniel had imagined it. He sat in the large chair at the front, reserved just for him, with his legs crossed and his hands folded and his famous warm smile steady on his face. Elder Barnabas rose and began his tribute. His voice was old and full and commanding. He spoke of Pastor Daniel's sacrifices. He spoke of grace, gone from us too soon, and how Daniel had carried that grief with grace and dignity. He spoke of Lily, his beautiful, silent daughter, a constant reminder of his devotion. Several women in the audience were already weeping. Pastor Daniel lowered his head modestly. He dabbed his eyes with his white handkerchief. The journalist was writing rapidly. The moment was everything he had ever built it to be. And then, from the back of the courtyard, there was movement. Ruth stood up first. She did not speak. She simply stood. And beside her, slowly, rose Lily. In her white dress, with her notebook clutched to her chest, Lily walked down the center aisle of the courtyard. People turned to look. Some smiled, thinking she was about to present a gift. Some frowned in confusion. Elder Barnabas paused. Pastor Daniel's eyes found Lily over the crowd, and something shifted in his face. The smile stayed in place, but behind his eyes, a cold, dark shadow passed through. Lily kept walking. Steady. Unhurried. Like a woman who had been waiting 10 years for this exact moment and had decided the moment had arrived. She stopped at the front, a few feet from her father, and turned to face the congregation. The courtyard went completely, utterly silent. Not a child whispered. Not a chair creaked. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Elder Barnabas sat down slowly, without knowing why. Pastor Daniel's hands, still folded in his lap, gripped each other so tightly his knuckles went pale. Lily looked out at the faces watching her, confused, curious, waiting, and she opened her mouth. She spoke. Her voice, unused for 10 years, was low and rough at first, like a door opening that had been sealed shut for a very long time. But it grew steadier with every word. And the congregation, who had never heard this young woman's voice, who had known her only as the silent girl, the troubled pastor's daughter, the quiet shadow who sat in the front pew every Sunday. They sat frozen as though the air itself had changed. Even the children at the front went completely still, sensing in the way children sense things that something enormous was happening, something that adults would talk about in low, serious voices for years to come. My name, Lily said, is Lily. I stopped speaking when I was 8 years old. Everyone thought I was broken. Everyone thought I was strange. But I was not broken. I was a witness. She paused. The silence was absolute. Her father had not moved. He had not spoken. He sat in his ceremonial chair like a statue, and every muscle in his body was rigid. 10 years ago, Lily continued, I sat at the top of our stairs in my pink nightgown, holding my rabbit, because I heard my parents fighting. I came to the top of the stairs and I looked down. And I watched my father. Her voice caught for one single moment, then strengthened again. I watched my father push my mother with both hands. She fell down the stairs. She did not trip. She did not slip. She did not have an accident. Lily's voice rose now, clear and ringing, filling every corner of the courtyard. My mother did not fall. My father pushed her. The congregation erupted. Not in noise, but in a terrible, collective intake of breath, like a single wave pulling back from the shore. Women pressed their hands over their mouths. Men turned to look at Pastor Daniel. Elder Barnabas had gone completely grey in the face. The journalist's pen had stopped moving. Several people near the back began weeping instantly, not even fully knowing why, only feeling that something that had been wrong for a very long time had just been named out loud. Pastor Daniel rose from his chair. His famous smile was gone. In its place was something raw and frightened that his congregation had never seen before, and seeing it, many of them understood in that instant that the girl was not lying. She is confused, he said, his voice careful and controlled. She has suffered. She does not know, but Lily turned to face him directly, and the look on her face stopped him mid-sentence. It was not a look of hatred. It was not a look of revenge. It was something far more powerful than either. It was the look of someone who had carried the truth alone for 10 years and had finally, at last, set it down. I know exactly what I saw, she said quietly. I have always known. And then Ruth stepped forward and placed in Elder Barnabas's hands the folded pages filled with dates, times, every drawing, every small detail Lily had recorded over years, including the statement she had written on the night she turned 15. Mrs. Josephine stood from her seat in the third row, her voice shaking but firm. I saw bruises on Grace. Twice. She told me she fell. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I should have asked harder questions. Then Ada, Sister Naomi's daughter, stood up. Then Mrs. Martin. Then 2 more women from the back. One by one, like candles being lit in a dark room, voices rose around the courtyard. Pastor Daniel looked around him, at his congregation, his elders, the journalist with his camera, the faces of people who had loved and trusted and followed him, and he saw that his performance was over. Not because of an enemy. Not because of a rival. Because of a girl in a white dress who had simply, finally, decided to speak. The ceremonial chair stood empty behind him as the elders moved toward him with serious faces and quiet words. And Lily, who had not cried once during her entire speech, walked back down the center aisle to where Ruth was waiting. Ruth took her hand and held it tightly. And for the first time since she was 8 years old, Lily cried. Not from pain. Not from fear. But from the feeling of a stone that has been in your chest for 10 years finally, gently, dissolving, the quiet, extraordinary relief of a truth that has been seen, and heard, and believed. They walked out of the courtyard together, hand in hand, into the open sunlight. Grace's daughter had finally spoken. And in speaking, she had given her mother's story, and her own, back to the light where it always belonged. Some people keep quiet not because they have nothing to say, but because no one was ready to hear the truth yet. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the truth only becomes powerful when more people hear it.